Welcome to GTC's Teaching Tidbits. Each episode, we explore a teaching technique, tip, practice, or idea from faculty for faculty. Today, we have joining us Matt Cazessus from the Behavioral and Social Sciences Department. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's our pleasure. We're so glad to have you joining us today. Would you tell us just a little bit about your background, the course or courses you've taught?
Sure. I come from a background of psychology and sociology with a focus on community and urban sociology studies. In between undergraduate and grad school, I worked at a homeless shelter for several years doing case management with homeless youth. And I've been teaching Greenville Tech about 9 years, mostly sociology, so intro and also social problems. I've recently begun teaching the leadership through the humanities course and community college teaching as well.
That's great. And actually, a little fun fact for anybody watching the episode, when I took the community college teaching course as a new faculty, Matt was my instructor. So I don't know if you remember that, Matt, but I do.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's a great course, and I always enjoy just meeting faculty who are teaching different things, and then really I learn as much from teaching it as hopefully the students get out of it as well, because it's a great way of refining teaching, honestly.
Yes, and I remember a lot of that work, even regarding the homeless, came into some of the examples you provided in that class. So it was a fun learning experience.
Awesome. I'm glad it stuck with you. Hopefully it helps even today.
Yeah, and I think as you shared your background, our viewers of this episode are going to see why you are the perfect fit for the topic today. Within the last couple of years, we've seen our world shift dramatically, and that may be a little bit of an understatement, but it has definitely shifted socially, politically, culturally, and so on. And with these shifts, current events now more than ever, and discussion of those current events are making their way into our classroom conversations regularly. Some of the more contentious topics may provide a challenge to us as we work to lead effective conversations and discussions within our classrooms. While the inclusion of these kinds of topics and conversations may be newer to some of us, our sociology instructors are no strangers to having these kinds of contentious discussions or conversations within their classes. So Matt is here today to share some helpful tips or principles for guiding these contentious conversations within our classrooms. So Matt, I'm going to turn it over to you to share your teaching tidbit.
Fantastic. Well, again, thank you so much for the opportunity. And I'm really happy to be able to talk through this, and it's nice to be recognized maybe as someone who has had these conversations for quite a while. I mean, teaching Sociology 101, by the end of the course, we have to talk about social class, sexuality, gender identity, race, ethnicity, immigration, a lot of things that in any year, election year or off year, are going to be contentious for many different reasons. So for me, when I design any course, it really starts with the preparation in mind. You want to think about what's going to be the composition of your course, who's going to be in the class. I teach classes at Brazier, which are often populated by a lot of high school students. And I have classes that are online with dispersed students who will never actually see each other or have limited ability to communicate face-to-face. So when you think about how you want to design your course, what role does conversation have in that class? And do you expect students to be able to challenge, confront, defend some type of point? Or is it going to be moderated through you? And then how do you want to design that moderation? Certainly students get a tremendous benefit when they talk to each other, and then they're asked to explain their own ideas as it relates to course concepts. So I always try and integrate that, at least in some aspect, whether it's virtual or face-to-face, hybrid, what have you. When I begin the class, I always try and personalize it. I use, just like I used with that introduction, some type of appropriate self-disclosure, talk about my background. I integrate stories with my family, my kids, my dog, my neighborhood, this going through my life, healthcare systems, traffic these days, whatever it is that can help kind of build that rapport with students. And when you're doing that, hopefully you're modeling what we learned is appropriate self-disclosure, like nothing too personal, nothing too confrontational, nothing that challenges anyone else, but it's going to give some humanization. And then you're deciding like what level of emotional content you want to bring into the class also. Like, do you want to talk about serious issues, or are we going to try and kind of maybe touch on these things and then move on? Or do we want to be actually able to really drill down into things that provoke a real reaction? And then, what's your flavor? What's your personal profile for handling that? Are you kind of self-effacing, kind of use humility? Do you use humor? Do you use other students to kind of fill in the gaps? You just have to decide what's your authentic self. I always try to remind people, you don't have to pretend to be a different type of teacher. You're just working on developing your own self. Being a false version of yourself is just going to come across sometimes as a lack of self-confidence, and it'll fail under duress. Like when you do get into that moment where the classroom isn't going the way you want, then you're going to have to revert to what's comfortable, and that can create kind of a seismic shift in the classroom that we usually want to avoid. Establishing boundaries is another big part of this preparation process. If you can say, here is the type of topics we'll cover in the class, here is the things we won't cover. And for many classes, you should probably establish, from early on, this is the scope of the class, therefore we won't need to go into. Or it's appropriate to say, this is an intro class. So while that topic is very interesting and valid, there's a wealth of discovery there, this is our natural kind of guideline. This is our fence that we're going to hit. And beyond that, I'll encourage you to take my social problems class, take this other faculty members class, take this history class where they have time to delve into that. And that'll be a great place for you to have those conversations where you can devote enough time to really getting into it. But knowing where that line is ahead of time, I think helps prevent students from feeling like they've been shut down on a conversation they want to have. And then that kind of transitions to the protocol. How do you control the space? Because it is your classroom. As much as we want students to be engaged, you're going to be responsible for the topics and how they occur. So what's your ceiling and your floor for participation? Do you want everyone to contribute? Does everyone have to contribute? What would that contribution look like? Can it be a think, pair, share, and then the other more talkative partner speaks? Is it going to be everyone has to contribute at least some amount of time talking? Do you rotate roles? I've been doing things in my leadership class recently where we rotate presenter roles and everybody has to take a turn doing presenting, and everybody has to be a team leader, and everybody has to be a recorder. We just kind of rotate those jobs around. It's worked well that students get a sense that they have to contribute certain ways. And then there's a ceiling, right? We all have very motivated students who have lots of ideas they want to share. They discover things in their personal lives or in their reading, and they want to bring those to the forefront. So there has to be a way of capping that as well. Let students know at some point in time, we're going to have to give some oxygen to the other people in the room. You can give them some number of tokens, some indicator that you work out with those most motivated students. Say, at this point, you've contributed, you've met all the goals that we need, but we need to make sure other people in the classroom can be heard as well. And so as long as you're establishing that type of preparation ahead of time, a lot of the contentiousness of these conversations can be de-escalated from early on. What I have recently applied these in is I just taught my chapter on race and ethnicity, which in a world where race and ethnicity is all over the media, various court decisions, various hot button issues, social justice movements, debates about what belongs in classrooms. Race and ethnicity is obviously huge once again. And when I introduced the topic, I used my own version of humor. I used some media clips with other comedians who I think use confrontations about race respectfully and in a thoughtful way that can be a little jarring, but also has some real way of refocusing students to the key issues. I like to bring students in with recognition that we don't have all the answers, that we don't expect to change everyone's mind, but this is a dialogue that we're going to have about a contentious topic, and we're going to be welcome to challenge other people's viewpoints, but we're not going to challenge each other's experiences, right? So you can have a different viewpoint, you can bring data, you can bring reflections, you can have ideas, but I'm never going to try and go over the top and say your experiences are invalid in any type of way. So that way we can encourage people that they can be heard, they can disagree, but we're not going to try and win a debate. This isn't a debate class. We're not trying to settle a huge social issue within our course here, but this is an opportunity to reach outside of our own experiences and hear what other people understand about these ideas as well. And don't be afraid to give yourself some breathing room, is I guess the kind of the final tidbit. Many times students will surprise us with an idea that we're not ready to process, and be ready to use all the techniques you can. You can say, let's see what the rest of the room thinks. And you can design a way of kind of polling the audience. It can be anonymous, it can be online through one of the virtual tools. It can even be a think, pair, share. Everybody partner up with 3 other people, discuss this, and then bring back to us what you think. That'll buy you time for you to process, right? And figure out how you want to resolve that. You can de-escalate maybe some student who is challenging another student or is being more confrontational than you want to model, and then use appropriate modeling. Like, how do you know that? Ask them questions about clarifying questions like, is this something that's happened to you? Is this something that you've witnessed? Is this something you've experienced? What are the sources you have for that? And by being genuinely enthusiastic and interested in their idea, they shouldn't necessarily feel like they have to defend themselves or feel challenged, but you genuinely want to know more about what they're offering. So then you know how to respond to it, and then reflect that over another student. Do you think that that's something you've experienced? Who else has had this experience? And then there's a way of kind of drawing the attention away, because sometimes there's one student who really wants to make a point. Sometimes there's 2 students or more who fall on different sides of an issue and are reluctant to let it go. So you have to kind of use these techniques to draw the natural kind of momentum of the conversation away and diffuse it out into the group, to take a break, take a pause, reorient, so that you can refocus the conversation on the learning objective for the day. And I think if you do all those things, you'll be much better than I am, right? So that's the optimal strategy. So if you can do some of those things on a daily basis, you'll be doing fine.
That is so great, Matt. I was sitting here listening, and I had questions popping up, and every time I had a question pop up, you basically answered it with your next thought. So there's so many helpful tips in here. The authentic self, establishing boundaries, planning what that discussion looks like ahead of time. I think one of those greatest things that has stuck out is the breathing room, because I imagine that sometimes those conversations come up even when we're not anticipating it, and that if we're not used to having those kinds of conversations in our classes, it can put us in a little bit of a panic. Where's this going? How am I going to handle this?
Absolutely. It's easy to imagine like the worst case scenario of like, here we go, right? Because we have these kind of triggers or concerns, these ideas, okay, this is exactly what I've been afraid of. Someone's accusing me of being biased, or someone's coming after the student and they seem emotional, and you can feel the energy going the wrong way in the classroom. We have ways of putting a pause, not jumping on someone and saying you can't talk, but be like, let's bring others in, let's hear others' ideas. And honestly, in any classroom with multiple voices, it's really hard for one person to dominate a conversation. unless you're giving them the space to do so. So keep encouraging others to jump in. I like to use, like I said, tasks that don't directly confront the issue that's most contentious. Maybe find something adjacent to it. Ask them to establish, when I talk about race, I'm like, well, what are the races? Like, how would you know what race somebody is? And then they have a kind of a fun time talking about, like, it's awkward, right? Because no one wants to be seen as racially biased or discriminatory or judgmental or using stereotypes. But it's like, if you had to describe these things, you recognize them. So work with each other. What are they? How would we even know these ideas if you hadn't been taught by society? So by kind of de-escalating the fight about it and giving people some authentic space to think about it and share and talk to each other, I think a lot of these conversations can find ways they really bear a lot of fruit, and students typically really enjoy the chance to talk about it.
Yeah, I love that. And I'll say, I mean, I think the biggest thing that's sticking out in my mind as we're kind of bringing this conversation to a close is just that emphasis that you put on, we can challenge views, but we're not going to challenge experiences. And I love that, because that's such a very clear boundary that I imagine you bring up frequently as a reminder for
Right.
them as well.
Yeah, I think incremental adjustment towards that as well. You always want to model what you're doing. If a student says something that even you personally strongly disagree with, I'm going to be the first one to be like, tell me more. Did that happen to you? Is that something you've seen? Who else in the class has seen this? And then, we can build from there. That way, hopefully, when another student wants to challenge their peer, they've seen me do it several times, and they often model. They jump in. They'll say the same kind of phrases I do. How do you know that's true? Like, what are your sources? And then I think we've moved forward, not just even in that learning community, but hopefully something that changes the temperature in another classroom, another conversation somewhere else.
Oh, that is so good. Thank you, Matt, so much for sharing all of, there's just so much in there. I imagine people are going to go back and rewatch so that they can take all the notes they possibly can. I was jotting notes down, but I'm going to have to go back and rewatch as well.
Sure. And then maybe we can carry it forward. There's plenty of other specific conversations that, whether you want to talk about race and ethnicity, gender identity and sexuality, there's lots of resources we can look into, and I'm sure many of us are going to continue to have these conversations going forward in a variety of classrooms.
Yes, absolutely. And I think you've opened the door, Matt. If you would like to continue the conversation, I'm sure Matt would be more than willing to chat with you. You're welcome to reach out at matthew.cazessus@gbltec.edu. And I think it'd be great if we dig deeper into some specific topics. So if you have a specific topic that you'd like to see us dig into, please let me know. You can email me at rachel.cobb@gbltec.edu. And as always, if you have a tidbit worth sharing, or you know someone who does, let me know. We want to invite them to do an episode to share that information with your fellow faculty here at the college. Well, that's this week's GTC Teaching Tidbit, and we'll see you next time.